This is the tutorial on creating a checkmark field. After completing this tutorial, you should understand how to create a checkmark field and use all of its features, as well as understand a few rules to remember when creating and laying out checkmark fields. Checkmark field should be used when you have a set amount of choices that you want to give to your participant, and then they choose one or more of those choices depending on how you set the field. There are a few simple definitions that we must cover. First off, a single mark only checkmark field means that the participant may only choose one of the options that they are given, whereas a multiple marks allowed means that the participant may choose all of the options that make sense for them for the question. Before I show you exactly how to create a checkmark field, there are a few guidelines and hints that I would like to share with you. First off, a checkmark field may consist of up to 30 individual checkmark areas. Second, checkmarks can be either circles or squares. There are times when you may want to differentiate between whether one is a multiple marks allowed or if it's a single marks allowed. Giving you different shapes also allows you to customize the layout and the look of your form. So you may choose squares if you wanted to give it one type of look, and circles if you want to give it another look. The third and possibly the most important guideline to follow is that check marks need to be 1/8 of an inch away from any text or object. It can be farther away, but no closer than 1/8 of an inch. This ensures that validation stays minimal and that your database will not contain false data. In order to demonstrate how to create a checkmark field and how to use its various options, we are going to need a question. For our example, I am going to use the question, how satisfied are you with the training you received? If you are unsure on how to create the question itself, please see the tutorial in the AutoData Learning Center on creating a text field. So now that we have our question, it is time to create our checkmark field. First, we go to the AutoData toolbar and we find the checkmark grid object. The checkmark properties box opens and you can see that there are all kinds of options and features to choose from. First, we have the field name box. In this box, we are going to want to put the name of the checkmark field we are creating. This name will also appear as the column name in the database once our form is collected from our participants and processed. The next box is where we specify the field order. This box is optional because Form Publisher will order your various fields upon publishing, if the order is not specified. By field order, we mean the order in which the field will be processed and put into the database. Here's an example. If this is number 1, it will be the first field processed when we're scanning and will appear first in the database. If it was 5, it would be processed 5th and would be the 5th thing in the database. It's important to note that field numbering needs to start over on each new page. Next, we have the response type. The choice you make here will determine what text is put next to the check marks by default. This can be changed later if you wish. And what actual value will be written to the database when a check mark is checked. There are a few provided options that are popular in this drop-down list. For instance, integer values, or an alpha value, or yes, no, true, false, male, female. You notice the last one says user-defined labels, which is what we will be using for the question on our form. In a little bit, I will go over exactly how to define the user-defined labels. But let's move on through this window and come back to that. You see that the next section is labeled Layout, and that is for a very obvious reason. Here you decide what the layout will be of your check marks. you have to make sure that the number of rows times the number of columns equals how many check marks there are going to be. After we determine the number of rows and number of columns that we want and make sure that it fulfills the number of check marks that we are going to have, we move along to the section called Style. In the Style section, we decide whether or not we want circle check marks or square check marks. There is no benefit of one over the other. It all depends on your personal preference. You notice that the next section is grayed out. And that is because this feature is only applicable when you have a grid of check marks, meaning more than one row and more than one column. So you see that if I up the amount of rows and the amount of columns, the order section becomes ungrayed. This section gives you the choice of how you want your responses ordered. If we choose down, then right, our choices would be labeled along a y-axis, meaning that the first choice would be in the upper left, the second choice would be below, the third choice would be below the first two, the fourth choice would then be next to the first choice, and so on and so forth. If we choose right, then down, the first choice would still be in the upper left, but the second choice would be right next to that, and the third choice would be right next to that, moving along an x-axis. The setup of this section completely depends on what you think will be easiest for your participants to interact with. The last section gives you a few field attributes that you can add to your checkmark field. The first is this allow multiple marks. What this does is allows you to have a question where a participant may want to choose more than one option or no options. If this is not checked, like it is here, and a participant chooses more than one option, during processing, the operator will be prompted with a validation screen saying that the person checked more than one, and please choose one of the options to be written to the database. When you check allow multiple marks, you notice that the treat as one field option is no longer grayed out. This option allows you to control the way that the data is written to the database. If this is not checked, each checkbox in the checkmark field will be given its own field in the database. If this is checked, the checked box values will be put together and written to the same field in the database. The last field attribute that you could put on your checkmark field is the verify if no selection. What this means is that if a participant leaves a checkmark field blank, meaning all of the options blank, they do not choose one of them, the operator will be prompted with a validation screen when they are processing that form to say, this person did not choose anything, please choose something. Earlier, when I had explained what the response box is all about, I said that I was going to come back to the user-defined labels. Well, now that we have completed the explanation of all the different options you have in this checkmark properties box, it is time to come back to the user-defined label. You notice at the top of this box there is a tab called User-Defined Labels. What this allows you to do is to actually define your own labels, your own values that are going to be written into the database. For instance, for our question, we are going to want to ask the participant and write to the database whether they were satisfied or dissatisfied. Because the custom user label has a 7-character limit, I am going to use 1- and 2-letter acronyms for my 5 custom responses. They are as follows: VD for very dissatisfied, D for dissatisfied, N for neutral, S for satisfied, and VS for very satisfied. Once I have my custom responses defined, I can use the options at the right to add more if I would like to, remove by clicking on the option I want to remove and then choosing remove, or I can modify one of my choices by double clicking on the label that I would like to modify, changing it here in the box, and then clicking modify. I can also clear the entire box if I wish by clicking on clear. Before I click OK and create the checkmark field, I am going to go back to the General tab to check over the different fields and options in this window. First off, I am going to change the field name to Satisfied. This will be a valuable reference for me in the database after I have processed the forms. It allows me to know what the values are that are in that particular field in the database. The field order box does not need to be changed because it is changed by the publish step after I've created the entire form. The next thing to change is the layout area. You notice that the number of rows times the number of columns does not equal how many responses I have. To fix this, I am going to change the number of columns to equal 5. Next, we have the style of marks, and I am going to just use circles. In the last step, the field attributes area only needs a check and verify if no selection. This is not the type of field that would require us to allow for multiple marks because we only want to know if they were satisfied or not satisfied. But we do want to make sure that they do choose something. After we have made changes to all of the various things we needed to, you click OK, and you see that the field is created on your form. Now you notice that my acronyms do not completely show up, so I can adjust that by just making this field a little bigger, then clicking on the actual acronym, coming up here to the toolbar and dragging the separator over just a little bit. Now we are able to see all of the acronyms for our satisfaction scale. Once I have done that, it's only a matter of putting it where I would like it to be, and that wraps up creating a checkmark field.